Welcome to the Table Podcast, where we discuss issues of God and culture, brought to you by Dallas Theological Seminary.
Well, welcome, and I want to thank you all for coming out on a Monday night to hear a discussion about life and as a Christian in the context of a cultural minority. We're going to do several things tonight. First off, I'm going to introduce John a little bit in terms of his background and let him set the context in Australia, and let him talk about his ministry at the Public Center, or the Center for Public Christianity. That's spelled C-E-N-T-R-E. I have no idea why we do that. You know, why do we reverse the letters in the alphabet? I have no idea. Maybe it just takes that long to make it around the earth. I don't know. But anyway, and he's going to share some stuff. We're going to share some stuff that the center has produced so you can get a feel for that, introduce you to their website. And then we're going to talk a little bit about sharing the gospel in the context of being a cultural minority. And then after that, there'll be some time for question and answers from the floor. And then, if you aren't exhausted by then, we're going to move from table to table. So this is going to have the same format as we had when Ed Stetzer was here in November. And I'm pleased to announce to you that our plan is to do one of these dinners every semester. So you all have shown that there is an interest, and so you didn't know that there was a test of the emergency broadcast system tonight, and you all passed. So you can pat yourselves on the back when the next one comes, and be sure and attend then as well. So, John, let's dive in. John is my host when I go to Australia. I usually do some taping and various gigs with him when I'm up there. I never know what they're going to ask me until I get there, but the exciting thing is that he takes me out for cultural jaunts. We've done Aussie Rules football together, gone to see the Sydney Swans, which is my team of choice in Australia. So no one knows what that means, right? So anyway, but you didn't know who the Green Bay Packers were, right? No. So
not until 2012.
Not until 2000. I'll let you tell that story. Tell the story about how you discovered who the Green Bay Packers were.
I get an email one day, and it has a signature down the bottom, Green Bay Packers, and it was an invitation to go and speak to this football team. But the thing is, I honestly had no idea. I'd never heard that name, and I really didn't know if they were an amateur team. And this was like a nice, sweet invitation to come and speak to a local football club. Seriously. So I text my son, who knows all things sporting, and I said, "I've just been invited to speak to this Green Bay Packers team. Are they any good?" And I still have the text. Within about 3 seconds, he replies, "What? No. They just won the Super Bowl last year. Blah, blah, blah. Can I come?" So he came. He came with me. But when I went to the Packers and I spoke to them on a Saturday evening before the Sunday game, I'm in a room with them, and they just look like fit young boys to me, you know.
Very fit and very big.
Big. Before they all came in, the seats for them were like really wide apart, and it just looked weird. But when they came in, it looked appropriate.
Normal.
But the thing is, I had no idea who any of them were. I kept on calling Aaron Rodgers Andrew. But of course, Josh was, he knew all the names. And So, how did we get there?
Because we were trying to demonstrate just how committed you are to scholarship.
Yes. Now, I have become a Green Bay Packers fan because, the next day I'm at Lambeau Field. And each time I come to the US now, I go to the Packers.
Makes pilgrimage. So he's almost American. Let's dive in. Let's talk about what you do. You grew up as an academic studying classics at Macquarie University, and But then you ended up in this Center for Public Christianity. Explain what that is.
It's a group of scholars who are passionate about communication with a world that doesn't believe and thinks there are reasons not to. So we got together about 8 years ago, although our vision was many years ago. We always wanted to do something like this. But the funding opportunity came 8 years ago. And so we just immediately started a group of scholar communicators and thought we want to produce a website that answers people's questions. We want to produce books and DVDs and so on. And we want to engage the public media, the mainstream media. And we really didn't know whether this would work as an idea because there hadn't been many Christian attempts to engage the media, as in write full articles and submit them to the newspapers. And it worked a treat. We were amazed. I mean, our mainstream media is quite left-leaning. It's... our mainstream media is very much like sort of CNN. We don't have a Fox in...
There's no Fox in Australia.
There's no Fox in Australia. In terms of like that, you know, that... Am I in trouble now? That,
I'm just watching you go, so
okay.
Just go for it.
Well, my observation is that Fox is conservative and reasonably positive toward Christian things, and CNN isn't. Am I right?
It's close enough.
Okay. And most of our media is more like CNN.
Okay.
And maybe even more left with some of them. Anyway, so we thought, oh no, you know, maybe this isn't going to work, but it has worked so well. We are published regularly. We're invited onto radio and TV reasonably regularly. It seems to us that the media is mainly ignorant, not out to get Christians.
Yeah, I mean, they do so well that when I came to Australia the last time, I did a gig for them on Australian Broadcasting Company, and the topic was hell. So it was a great
We deliberately gave it to Darryl.
That's exactly right. So let's let the burning American take care of that one anyway. So
didn't we also give you a radio gig at like 4 a.m. our time?
Yeah, I think you did that.
Yeah,
that was for Christmas.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to be up opening presents, but you can do it at 4 a.m.
Yeah.
from Dallas.
Yeah.
So it's been fun. Let's talk a little bit about the situation in Australia. What is this? Where does Christianity reside culturally in terms of demographics in Australia?
Well, more than half the country ticks Christian on their census box. So there's a real cultural memory that Christianity is the religion Australia's got most association with. But the church attendance is 15% in the regular category. And regular category is once a month. So,
and that's everybody.
And that includes Roman Catholics,
yeah.
Orthodox, liberal Anglicans, and so on. So 15% once a month, it's pretty low. The evangelicals would be a very small portion of that.
So you definitely are functioning as a cultural minority in Australia.
Yeah.
And the tone of what you do. Let's talk about. You used the word. We just did a podcast. You used the word generous, which isn't a normal word we would associate with apologetics and engagement, not necessarily all the time. So what do you mean by generous engagement?
I guess it means, firstly, just listening. It's an act of generosity to listen to what someone's complaint is before you answer it. It's a generous thing to do. And feel the problem. Nearly always in what CPX does, whether in the media or the stuff on our own website, you'll hear us conceding the problem before we try and offer any contribution. And that's not a strategy. That we don't see that as a kind of trick. You know, it wouldn't be cool if we concede and then get them with the right hook. We sympathise with sceptical people. So I think out of that sympathy, which is a kind of generosity, we really do feel when people put the questions to us. And so we do want to acknowledge always that most people aren't idiots. Most people who aren't Christians They're not idiots. And so they've got complaints or bad experiences, and so you've got to engage with that. But the other part of generous, I think, is when you give your perspective, it's from a non-defensive posture.
Mm-hmm.
And doesn't speak with any air of entitlement, as if, you know, this is a Christian country and you better listen to me because I'm the church after all,
mm-hmm.
which really puts people's backs up in Australia. I mean, maybe it goes down a treat here with the non-Christian world, but not in Australia. So that air of entitlement we try and shoot all the time. So all of that means generous, is what I mean by generous.
Okay. Now, what we're going to do is I want to show two clips. I'm going to go ahead and show them back to back. The first is going to tell you a little bit about the Center for Public Christianity. You get a feel for what they do. It's an encouragement to you to go to publicchristianity.org, which is the website, in which there are tons of resources that are available. And then I'm going to give you a sample of one of those resources that deals with a particular piece that went viral on the net called Zeitgeist. Many of you may be familiar with that. It's an assessment of the Zeitgeist video. That's going to be Chris Forbes, who also teaches at Macquarie and teaches classics at Macquarie. And so we're going to do those back to back. So if the video team will gear up with the video, we'll do the
While Christian faith surges ahead in some parts of the world, in the West, there's a growing scepticism, even hostility, towards religious faith and Christianity in particular. There is a great need for clear, thoughtful, public engagement about the Christian message. Hello, I'm Lee Hatcher, and I'd like to introduce you to CPX, the Centre for Public Christianity. Since its founding in 2007, the Centre for Public Christianity has gained a reputation for producing high-quality, considered, balanced and accessible material which is featured in newspapers, websites, radio and television. CPX has four main areas of work. First, writing for a range of mainstream publications and regular appearances on radio and television, providing Christian comment on the major issues facing our society.
The other thing I'd want to add to that is that sometimes religion is the sole reason for issuing restraint and compassion and not get involved in conflict. We see that in historical examples frequently.
Sure. Here is a physicist telling us about something that all of us think sounds like something, and saying by some magical change of the English language, no, it's nothing. And if you disagree with me, then you don't understand science. But there are scientists, leading scientists, who agree this ain't nothing. It's a very complex and beautiful something.
That's a very damaging thing to say.
Oh, no, it's horrible. I think it's because we're operating with this view of Christianity in particular that's about rules, and if you step out of line, you better watch out.
You do need to distinguish between the religions rather than lump them all together, so I think that's really important. They're not all the same.
Second, staff and fellows speak at universities, schools, conferences and corporations.
But such a privileged viewpoint is exactly what the comparative approach denies to every other faith-based perspective. So while such an approach is thought to be more objective, it's unclear to me whether it takes its own biases into account.
And they organise public events for major international speakers.
Leibniz, Spinoza, Kant, Hegel, Locke, Berkeley saw the origin of the universe as lying in a transcendent reality.
The state should neither be religious, nor it should be secular, but it should be neutral. And more precisely, I think, it should be impartial toward all overarching interpretations of life.
Third, CPX works with leading academics from around the world to develop Christian perspectives on a broad range of issues. Much of this work ends up in an online library of resources and is made available for free.
It's fair to say that half this country actively believes themselves to be Christian.
Christianity has a particular problem because I think many people in Australia are bored with Christianity. They think they know what it is, and in fact they have no idea.
The idea that we're just blind believers, whereas scientists have proof for everything, is completely wrong.
If it's not Christianity with your sleeves rolled up, then what species of faith is it? What is that? And I'm not interested in that.
Seeking pleasure and avoiding pain, that's a very selfish attitude. And I don't believe that selfishness gets you very far in the happiness business at all.
You have to avoid extremes. You have to avoid the extreme of solely excluding religion, but you also have to avoid the extreme of excluding reason.
If it's not religion, it'll be something, you know, a belief in the free market or in astrology or superstition or conspiracy theories.
The Bible has stood the scrutiny of the finest minds of over 20 centuries and is still standing.
Finally, CPX publishes a range of books and DVDs that highlight the relevance of the Christian faith today. I'm proud to be involved with this exciting young organisation as it seeks to present the truth, beauty and goodness of Christianity with well-researched print, video and audio material about the relevance of Christianity in the 21st century.
Zeitgeist, from the German Spirit of the Age, is an immensely popular movie that can be viewed all over the internet. It has millions of hits and has extreme popular appeal, especially to those who are into a good conspiracy theory. Now, the second half of the film is an elaborate portrayal of the 9/11 tragedy as the work of the American government itself. But the first half calls into question the entire story of Christianity. Centuries of Christian history are swept away as the narrator explains that the whole thing is one large myth. Large historical claims are made that, if true, do mean it's all over for those wanting to place any hope in Jesus as someone relevant to today. To get some wisdom on this complicated topic, we've asked into the studio Dr. Chris Forbes, a senior lecturer in the Ancient History Department at Macquarie University in Sydney. Dr. Forbes is a specialist in the history of Greek thought and religion, Alexander the Great, and New Testament history. Chris, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
You've seen the Zeitgeist. What led you, an ancient historian, to watch this internet movie, and what was your initial reaction?
Well, I first heard of it because my daughter was spending 5 months studying in Russia. She was at St. Petersburg, and Christian friends of hers there were getting a really hard time by people making claims from the movie, and she emailed me and said, "What can you find out about it?" So I had a look.
And your response?
Well, I ended up almost laughing because the claims it makes are mostly wildly wrong and in some cases simply silly.
Can we focus in on what is really the heart of the claim of the movie as it connects with Jesus? And that is that the whole Jesus story of him being born right through to his crucifixion and resurrection is a mishmash of ancient mythologies. In particular, the mythology of the sun god of Egypt, Horus, we're told.
Yeah, John, can I stop you there? Horus isn't a sun god.
Okay, but the movie says that he is.
Yes, it does. But he's not.
What sort of god was he?
He's the god of the sky. Ra is the sun god.
Okay. That makes the connection between him being a sun god and Jesus being the son of God more difficult, doesn't it?
I thought it was only a pun to start with. I mean, the son of God, S-U-N-S-O-N, it's a perfectly good pun in English. Well, it's a fairly bad pun in English. But it doesn't work in Egyptian, and it doesn't work in Greek, and it doesn't work in Latin. It's just a pun.
So leaving all that aside,
yeah.
The claims about this particular sky god then, Horus, are that he was born on December 25th, he was adored by 3 kings, he grew up, he had 12 disciples, he was crucified and then he was resurrected. Well, that sounds like the Jesus story.
It does, because that's what it is. But it's not the Horus story. Oh, by the way, you left out born of a virgin.
Born of a virgin, indeed.
Yes, except that his mother Isis wasn't a virgin. And there's no suggestion in the Egyptian sources that she was. This whole list of parallels are true of Jesus, aren't actually true of Horus at all.
The ancient sources don't mention these details?
It's pretty unlikely that the ancient Egyptians would say that Horus was born on December the 25th, because December is a Latin month and their calendar is completely different. Was Horus crucified and raised from the dead? No, Horus wasn't crucified. Horus wasn't killed at all. Osiris was killed, betrayed and killed by his brother Set, who then cut up his body into very small pieces and had them scattered all over Egypt so they couldn't be patched back together and resuscitated. And the rest of the myth of Osiris is about Isis gathering the pieces of his body, binding them up with bandages so that he can become the first mummy and therefore be resuscitated. But all of that happens not in historical time. That all happens in the Egyptian equivalent of the dream time, in mythological time.
I guess the punchline of the Zeitgeist movie, as it connects with Jesus, is that because the Jesus story is just a mythical construct, which you're saying it isn't, the movie is saying he didn't exist. He's not a historical figure. Does that have currency in serious historical research today?
No, there's no serious question for historians that Jesus actually lived. There's real issues about whether he is really the way the Bible described him. There's real issues about particular incidents in his life. But no serious ancient historian doubts that Jesus was a real person, really living in Galilee in the 1st century.
The movie, in its list of references, if you get the transcript, some characters pop up, some scholars pop up, and it gives this sense that it is an authoritative movie, like Gerald Macy, G.A. Wells.
Gerald Macy, English poet and amateur Egyptologist. Not an expert, not an academic, not actually an historian at all. G.A. Wells, an academic, yes. Professor of German literature. Writer of popular books, trying to claim that Jesus is a myth. But he's not a historian.
Did you find any serious historical work in the list of references?
Not a single one. What I found is a whole list of books claiming to be written by experts, quoting other people claiming to be experts, quoting actually none of the ancient evidence at all.
And yet a lot of people have been enamoured with this movie or deeply troubled by it. What is your advice to them?
Can I be awfully blunt? Don't believe everything you see on YouTube.
Given that this interview will also be on YouTube, have you got any further advice for them?
Yes. Check references. Go looking for ancient evidence. If somebody claims something about Horus or Mithras or Dionysus, if they're only quoting another modern author, or in the case of Massey, someone writing in the 19th century, that's not good enough. What historians want to know is not do you quote historians, they want to know can you quote ancient evidence. And there's simply no ancient evidence that Horus or Mithras or Dionysus was born on the 25th of December, born of a virgin, crucified. The ancient stories simply don't say that about them. So the parallels with Jesus just collapse.
Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
That's how you kill Zeitgeist in about 7 minutes. There's no Geist in that Zeit. Anyway, so that's a sample of the type of thing that you all do at CP. You call it CPX for as an abbreviation.
Yeah. So X is a Greek chi for Christianity.
Yeah. And that's a sample of what we're talking about. And I thought you ought to get a sample. The site is literally loaded with resources like that, covering all kinds of topics. There very much is a mirroring of what John is doing in Australia with what we are trying to do here in terms of the production of resources. The one difference is they do a lot of what we call short form in media, very short, crisp, 5, 7, 10-minute types of things. They do some documentaries as well. We've opted for a longer form in our podcast that we split up. But the basic approach is very, very similar, as is the tone. And that's what I want to spend the rest of our time talking about, is talking about the tone of engagement and wrestling through that. Let's talk a little bit about terminology. And now we spent a lot of time on the podcast going through several examples. For you all tonight, I just want to talk about one. And that is talking about truth and beauty. And one of the things that we have talked about amongst ourselves and that we're trying to do is thinking about how do you translate terms, particularly problematic terms or difficult terms, into discourse that you have with someone who is a doubter or a believer or not a believer, but asking questions, a skeptic, that kind of thing. How do you translate theology into the language that a person might be able to hear? And one of the interesting terms I think that CPX has played with is the term beauty, and in particular thinking about beauty in relationship to the concept of truth. You know, truth, as you all know, living in the shifting times that we're in, and particularly in association with postmodernism, is coming up for a hard time. And so the idea of a truth from above or a comprehensive truth struggles to gain merit. Well, one of the ways that CPX has tried to get at truth without dropping the idea of conviction and that there are things that the Bible says is to talk about the concept of beauty. And John, why don't you elaborate on how that works?
For us, beauty is a very broad concept. We don't just mean pretty. We mean the goodness, the attractiveness, the wholeness of an idea. And of course, it's the Bible's first theme, really. Once you get past that there's a God, you know, that sevenfold repetition after every creative act. It was good, it was good, it was good. And down it goes 7 times, and the 7th time, it was very good. And this seems to be, well, of course, it's deliberate. And it's deliberately saying that this creation has come from an orderly mind. It is good. You could have had the word beautiful in the sense that we mean it. That the order and purposefulness that one observes or intuits about the universe is real, says Genesis 1. Now, the interesting thing is that the new atheists have very recently spotted that they have a beauty problem. I don't mean that Richard Dawkins isn't a very pleasant-looking gentleman. It really has dawned on them that the rational, the sort of perceived cold, rational approach that they're famous for isn't cutting it with people, and that they've given the impression that science and rationalism kills the aesthetic of life, kills the goodness that we intuit, the beauty that we intuit. And so you have seen just in the very last few years, Dawkins, Sam Harris, Lawrence Krauss, who I was on TV with there, talk about the wonder and beauty that science gives you. I think it's a bit of a sham, because they've got to the point where they're basically saying that the sum total of beauty, the sum total of the experience of wonder that you have from science is a mammalian chemical instinct responding to external stimuli. So they want to say you can look at a sunset and understand a sunset, and that's wonder. No, that is no different in status from the chemical reaction that occurs when a rock drops on my toe. There's no way of distinguishing them. They're both mammalian chemical reactions to external stimuli. Where I'm going with this is that only a worldview like the Judeo-Christian worldview can ground beauty, the intuitions we have for the orderliness and purposefulness of existence, in reality, the reality that all of this stuff is intended. So that instinct you have for the good and the beautiful is not just an instinct, it is actually grounded in the fact that this universe reflects the divine mind. And so, I think Christianity is at a serious advantage in describing for people how goodness and beauty are there, and they're intended to be there, and they're grounded in ultimate reality. This is something, of course, C.S. Lewis and before him G.K. Chesterton were all about. They wanted to convince you that Christianity was not only logos, true, but that it was also pathos and ethos, that it was also attractive and good.
So this is a way into having a conversation to get people to think about truth, but to do it through a different kind of lens that gives them pause, and where there's instinctive reaction, you know, when you see a beautiful sunset, or you go to the beautiful landscapes that really mark out, you know, both of our countries, and you stare and you go, that's amazing. That there's something about it that's there.
Yeah, because if you're really a consistent Richard Dawkins, you've got to look at the sunset, feel the feeling, and then remind yourself that really it's just a mammalian chemical reaction to an external stimuli. Kind of take something out of it. Whereas someone with a theistic, a personal theistic worldview goes, that's intended.
Mm-hmm.
And these instincts have come from the hand of an artist. We were talking earlier today about the famous atheist, British intellectual A.N. Wilson, who wrote scathing things about C.S. Lewis and Jesus. Very, very much in the centre of the intelligentsia in Britain. Has recently become a Christian. Well, an Anglican.
Don't go there.
I am an Anglican. And when he wrote his story of conversion, he describes, it's really interesting actually, because he describes how difficult it was for him to give up his status within that intelligentsia set by becoming a weird God believer, and more than that, a Jesus God believer who attended church. But he says in this New Statesman article where he describes his conversion, that it was music that in the end convinced him he had a problem. Because he said it's an analogy to the moral argument. He wanted to believe that his humanitarian instincts were grounded, but he couldn't think of any way to ground them as an atheist. And then he was listening to some Mozart, I think it was, one day, and he thought, my goodness, not only can I not ground my moral instincts, I can't ground my instinct for beauty either. And he thought that that's impossible. I have to believe that this musical experience is grounded in a reality, that it is intended, that my experience of this music cannot just be a mammalian stimuli. And so that led him to theism, and then to Jesus theism.
Thanks for listening to the Table Podcast. For more podcasts like this one, visit dts.edu/thetable. Join us next week for part 2. Dallas Theological Seminary. Teach truth, love well.